It's like, or like a marriage. It is like a marriage. It's some form of a legal marriage between two people.
It's probably truer than we assume at the beginning.
True, exactly. So, understanding.
Hi, I'm Kyle Werkerly, Certified Professional Ghostwriter. I'm glad you're listening as I welcome industry experts to share stories. You'll hear of lessons learned the hard way, overcoming professional hurdles, turning experience into actionable knowledge, and how to connect with your target audience. This is the Career Challenges Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of the Career Challenges Podcast. My guest is Nimisha Brahmbhatt. Nimisha is a British-based, Kenyan-born management consultant, entrepreneur, and industry enabler with a proven track record of implementing large-scale businesses transformation in FTSE 100 and Fortune 500 companies. So welcome to the show, Nimisha.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for having me here today.
Yeah, and you're calling all the way from London, correct?
I am indeed from cold and rainy London.
Yeah, and it's been cold and rainy here in San Antonio, so kind of mirroring weather right now.
Yep, I guess it's part of the whole winter feel, isn't it, at the moment?
Yes, it is. When I was reading up on you, when you agreed to come on the show, it said you invest in disruptive startups. So I'm curious, what defines a disruptive startup?
I really love that question. It's actually one that I get asked quite often. And I'm sure you've seen as well through the work you do, that word kind of gets pushed around quite a lot as well. Mm-hmm. So for me, how would I define a disruptive startup? For me, it's most important that they're effectively challenging the status quo in whichever industry they're operating in. And I think if you look at the current narrative of where, we're going as a society with things around climate change and what we have to do fundamentally to shift the needle for our basic survival, I think disruption is so important in this space, specifically where companies are taking those necessary changes that need to happen and turning them into enterprises and fundamentally shifting the way we as consumers engage with those products or consume them, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, wouldn't all startups be technically disruptive in some way?
Yeah, by that definition, they probably would be. But I think when I dive deeper into that topic, I'm looking at how do these startups fundamentally change the way we engage with products. So one of my favorite ones in my portfolio is this new burgeoning one called the Society company. Mm-hmm. And they're effectively introducing a new distribution model that gets you all of your everyday household items, all for under £1 or maybe $1.30 each, which you would need in a month, that are all organic, no plastics, recyclable packaging. And they retail that through churches and schools. So the reason I find this so interesting is because if we were to look at any traditional kind of business that was going to engage on the whole delivering organic produce sustainably, they'd still try to develop distribution channels through the traditional way, right? So we still probably need a high street presence, or we're probably going to have an online presence and go direct to consumer. But this one is so interesting because it's leveraging the infrastructures that's already in place within society, and then building on that to create these sorts of channels. And what I love about it is the kids get so involved, especially when they do it through schools, especially in the recycling side of it. So you see all these kids coming back and dropping off like the empty canisters and bottles, and really engaging with the topic of sustainability through the products that they consume. So for me, that fundamentally challenges the way we buy the things we need for our home, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what I call challenging the status quo. That's what I call being disruptive, effectively in the way that we engage with products that serves the sustainability agenda.
Wow.
Yeah.
So with a disruptive startup, I would assume there's more risk involved in investing in that. What little I know of investing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the startup space is effectively quite a risky investment as it is. It's not like a traditional financial product in a bank that is backed by multiple insurances or things like that. I think this is you as the investor completely trusting in the idea and effectively looking at whether you believe the team is going to really be able to deliver to the idea itself. So I mean, my husband always jokes with me. He's like, you probably delve in the world of risky more than most people. In other words, risk doesn't really scare me. But I think if you're going to talk about investing in the startup space, there is an element of risk that is involved with, any investment you make. And I guess it's just how do you balance that risk against the benefit that you're going to gain, and how can you actually offset it yourself internally within your own finances.
Mm-hmm. And are there ways to do that? I mean, you'll probably have to really dumb it down for me, but are there ways to do that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? Like, I think the most basic places that this is kind of the reason I got into investing in startups in the first place, was to really look at the return of investment from a startup versus what are you getting by just leaving the money in the bank or buying a bond or something like that. And when you then look at that return of investment, you're measuring the ability for that product or the business to be actually able to deliver to that promise. So, I mean, if we look at the last 10 years, we've seen the financial services industry has kind of started to contract. It's not really growing as well as it did. People don't really trust banks anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's easier, but the shift or the other side of it is that it's easier to build a relationship with a young team of people who are building an idea. And I guess it helps when you have expertise in that space like I do. Mm-hmm. But it's much easier for you to build a relationship and collaborate and actually support them in delivering to that promise than it is to hold a bank accountable to do the same. So, I mean, in terms of how you could really offset that risk, I guess the first place I'd start is, it's kind of like if you were to go to Vegas and go to a casino, are you happy to see that money disappear if things weren't going to go well, and not have any regret around that? That's kind of the first place to start, because, you are right, it is risky and sometimes things don't work, and that could often be things that are not in the startup's control. So that's where I'd always start. Are you okay to see that money go if it didn't work? But then secondary to that is, like I said, the reason my portfolio of companies has been so successful is because I make it a point to, as an investor, not only give them the money, but also support them in other ways. So if it's not something that I can help them with, then it's certainly somebody in my network who'll be able to support them to achieve that next target, to keep them going and keep them maintaining that momentum. And I think the other part of it as well is, from your point of view as an investor, is obviously don't invest in something you don't understand. Because I see people do that all the time. I mean, it may seem like a good idea on paper, but if you fundamentally don't understand the industry or what is required to make it work, you yourself will struggle with the anxiety of whether this thing is going to even achieve the ROI that you have been promised. And so I think that element is really important, which is, invest in things or industries or markets that you yourself understand and actually have a better grasp of, because that helps kind of reduce the risk profile for a start, like for your investment.
Mm-hmm. So when you say, you need to understand what you're investing in, do you find sometimes the people who are, or the company, the startup, they may not have positioned themselves as well? I mean, the concept may be pretty simple, what they're trying to do and what they need money for. It's just the way they're presenting it seems a little, vague, or I guess verbose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you asked that question, because this is actually something that, I come up against so often. I mean, I've been in countless rooms where people have pitched to me, and it would be me plus 5 other people, and I would get it, but maybe the 3 others wouldn't. And I think, a place that you start from when I look at pitches from startups is they don't necessarily understand their audience all the time, And the thing is, there's this huge social narrative around it's really easy to just, register a company, get an idea, and then mobilize some people behind it and get investment. And because of that narrative, I've seen also so many people on the flip side of it as investors go, yeah, I've got about, this much money sitting around, I'll just put it in a good idea. But that's, I think, where it goes wrong. So from a startup's point of view, they don't they haven't really got to understand, one, what type of investor are they really looking for? And so they don't match the narrative in their pitch to that investor. So unless you're really eloquent with understanding business models and, how people plan to make money based on a service or a product, you are going to struggle to either see the value in the idea, or, like I said, for the startup, even put the investment into them. So I think this is something I work with all of my founders very closely on, is to always be shifting that pitch or that narrative and making it very specific to the person who you're in front of, so that they get why not only are you a viable investment, but why they are also a good match to be an investor in your company. Because this is the other side of the spectrum, and this is the part that startups always get wrong, is it's not just about getting the money. You've also got to look at what this person is going to bring to the table, especially in the early stages. Money is just as good as the team around you and the collaborative network around you who can help you deliver to the idea. And I'm sure you've seen this loads of times. Lots of great ideas get lots of money, but never really go anywhere, because they've never got to understand, well, beyond the financial capital, what is the human capital that I need to move, shift the needle on this initiative? So getting to understand, I kind of call it like dating, it's like, or like a marriage. It is like a marriage. It's some form of a legal marriage between two people.
It's probably truer than we assume at the beginning.
True, exactly. So, understanding what you bring to the table as the investor, what the startup really needs, how are you both going to work together to achieve that goal, especially in the very early stages, like seed funding, or, when you're just trying to get them to their first sort of 7 figures. The people who are involved in those stages really need to be involved. And you want people within your investor network who are actually going to roll their sleeves up with you and help you deliver to that. So it's not just about, they've got X amount of money to give you. It's also about, beyond that, what are they able to support you with? And so the startups need to really focus their pitches to that specific ask. And I've also seen startups, this is my favorite one, which I find so funny, is when they pitch you like you're the customer of their product, not the investor. So they're just giving you loads and loads of features about, we're so good at this and we're so good at that, but there's nothing about, as an investor, how am I going to make money out of this idea? So I see that far too often, and that, obviously from my work within the corporate world, I've got to understand it's simply because they've just not got to understand their audience very well, and what is it that they would need to hear. And oftentimes it's also because they probably just don't understand their business that well, and people really underestimate this, because I have immense respect for founders, because it takes a lot of guts to, put your money where your mouth is and get an idea moving. But I think where they struggle also is that, in the very early stages, your idea is not even that refined, and it's going to keep changing as you refine it. So to stay up to date with that narrative as it changes is also equally challenging. So, I think it's a great question you asked, Kyle, because I think it's something that people really, really struggle with, especially founders in the early stages.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned most people do the pitch as if, they're pitching to a customer. How have there been pitches that stood out in your mind of, okay, they really get what they're trying to do here, and they've got a really good setup, and the story really resonates? Or have there been pitches like that?
Oh yeah, all the startups I've invested in have literally had those sorts of pitches. Honestly, when I was first introduced to Society Company, who I spoke to you about earlier, it was exactly that. It was almost like they had the best trifecta in their pitch. They understood what their customer needed. They understood what their collaborators needed, and in that case, it was the churches and schools. But more importantly, they also understood what the investor needed. And they did that all in 3 minutes, which was really impressive. I know. So for me, that was kind of like, this is the blueprint of how pitches should be done, at least, the elevator or 3-minute pitches. I was sold on the idea from that point. And then, like I said, for me, it was just imperative to understand that the team that they had were able to deliver to the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a secondary part of like, getting involved as an investor, or like how you do your due diligence. It's, for me, the biggest thing is who is the team.
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of interested. You said they got it done in 3 minutes. So was
Mhm.
there a lot of slides? Did they talk a lot? Was there infographics? How did it work?
Let me think. It was 5 slides, mainly infographics, so not very text heavy at all. So you, as a listener, you're sort of forced to listen to the speaker, because that's also one of my pet peeves with presentations. If you've got too much text on the presentation and then someone speaking, it's like the audience is confused at where they have to focus.
Mm-hmm.
So this was brilliant because it was just infographics, and so and the speaker was telling you the story, and you could follow the story through the infographics. And I think that's why it was really easy for you to, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a collaborator or investor, it was really easy for you to understand how you fit into their business and where you would benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Awesome.
the thing is, when I think, I really believe when you nail a pitch like that, I think it also means your proposition is so strong. So if I'm interested in an investor, a consumer will also be interested.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the hidden seal of approval that you need almost.
Wow. So those that you said that was a 3-minute pitch.
Mm.
Are those shorter pitches usually better? I mean, because it probably sounds like they're more organized. They kind of have a better idea of what they're trying to get across, and they don't want to bog you down with all this information until you're eventually, numbed. So, I mean, are
Mm.
shorter pitches generally a better approach?
I believe so, they are, right? Because, I mean, if you just think about, for the average person, how many things compete with our attention anyway, as it
Mm-hmm.
is. And then in that, if you have literally a minute or two with a potential investor, because that's possibly all you'll get, how are you going to make sure? For me, the 3-minute pitches are wonderful because they can help you deliver on the idea. And then if you've caught someone's attention by that point, then you can take the conversation to the further details and the more information that they need. But again, I love my dating analogies. It's like walking into a speed dating room and like asking those 3 questions on the table and feeling like the person gets you or you get them. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit like that. And then you can take the conversation further or have the second date or whatever.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, One of the things, Chris Voss, he wrote a book, Don't Split the Difference. He's a FBI hostage negotiator, and he
Wow.
points out whenever when he was doing it, that he had a team with him. So he would be talking to the person, the hostage, and he'd be talking to him, and his team would be listening because neuroscience that they've done research on, that we're putting out our bodies and our language. We're putting out about 1,500 bits of information whenever we're communicating, but
Mm.
we as people can only process about 400 to 600 of those bits. And
Wow.
so he wanted to have his team with him because he didn't want to miss anything, and he
Mm.
trusted his team too, because if they handed him a note and said, "Well, say this," he's like, "Well, they probably picked up on something that I didn't pick up on."
Mm-mm.
So when you're in a pitch, is it usually just you?
No, no. I do have people who come with me. I have 4 to 5 people who I trust very deeply in terms of their perspective and their opinion. And I think, when you're a management consultant, you tend to work in teams anyway. So you do rely on the ability for somebody else to pick up things that you necessarily wouldn't. And I think if you have, if you have that nuclear team around you who are very close with you, you also understand each other's strengths. So when you're in that room, you can kind of reserve some elements to somebody else. So it's like, Jane will definitely pick up all the stuff around the finances because that's her strong point. Or, Brenda will pick up all the stuff around PR because that's her zone of genius. And so I can reserve some of the queries I have on those fronts to them because I know that they will have picked it up. So yeah, absolutely. I do have a team around me, and I do rely on them very much, especially in these sort of early stages where we're working out what we want to be able to invest in, but also where we would be able to add most value.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I would feel probably intimidated walking into a room and there's not one person I have to talk to, but 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6. I mean,
Yeah.
what are some ways that these startups can kind of, I guess, mitigate that so they don't feel so intimidated?
I think, again, I think it depends on the type of founder you are, or, kind of what drives you. Some people are naturally confident. Some people are just not great public speakers and better in an informal setting. So I think one of the best things I kind of advise my founders on is just practice, even if it sounds ridiculous. Like, get your CMO or somebody to sit in front of them and, refine that pitch, get feedback from even people like myself. So a lot of my founders always tap into me before they would go on a pitch for their next stage, so that I can help them refine some of the wording or how they say certain things, or, the inflection or what they focus on. So definitely leverage the people around you, especially if you are a founder. You'll have a few people who are working with you on the startup. So practice your pitch with them, practice in front of a mirror if that helps you. But just remember that once you're in that room, one of the biggest pitfalls for founders is that they feel like they have to almost be somebody else in order to win the pitch. Because, and I can understand why that happens, because when you're so focused on developing a pitch that hits all the points that you want to make sure everybody understands, you can almost not be natural anymore, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So one of the things I always tell them is nobody knows this business better than you. And that's a fact, because no one has invested the time, effort, or energy the way you have as this founder from the very day one to understand the problem statement, the market, the consumer. Obviously, there's an element of you learning along the way, but just always have that in the back of your mind, that you're just as worthy to be in this room as the investors who are in this room, because they know their vocation well, but you know this business well. And that primer in your mind, I think, like at least what I've seen with my guys, is it always relaxes them into a space where then they're just authentically speaking about the business from a place of their own genius and knowledge, as opposed to something that's rehearsed. So the preparation and practice previously would have helped them kind of nail all the key points that they must remember. But that primer later on supports them in just going back to being a natural founder and just almost conversationally be able to talk about your business.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great advice. If ever one day I become a startup founder,
you know where to find me.
Yes. There we go. I've got my first investor already locked down. Here we go.
There you go.
So, how did you get into not just, startup funding, but disruptive startup funding? Is there kind of a specific point in your life that you can point to and say, this is kind of where I made that decision?
That's a great question. It was a combination of things. So to give a bit of background, I started my career exactly 10 years ago. And I started off working in management consulting. So I always knew that I was going to be an entrepreneur. I just never thought I would have been an investor, which was quite interesting. Mm-hmm. So in the early 5 years of my career, I was working very heavily with energy companies, specifically around their transition to renewable and zero carbon, and how are we going to achieve that? And so I always found myself working on very pioneering projects or disruptive technologies that companies were going to start adopting, et cetera, et cetera. And it was actually my job to engage with the C-suite to understand how would that happen. So I always found I was always in these spaces where I was doing that naturally anyway. So I was always involved with the disruption or the innovation, and how do you achieve that, and actually how do you achieve it with a return on investment. So if you see like how the dots all join together, I was naturally doing what an investor would do anyway. And when I sort of left working for the bigger consultancies and set off on my own 5 years ago, the objective then was very much to continue being part of the innovation and disruption, but more from a consultant's point of view. And as time went on, I started to see that, the bigger impact I could have was not necessarily just advising on what these companies could do once they've received the funding to do it, but to actually be one of the people who fund some of this innovation. Because what I had started to see was massive gaps, people, there was a lot of money going into technologies, whether, so if it was something to do with the Internet of Things, everybody was all over it. But if it was something to do with building sustainable supply chains, nobody was interested. And so I started to realize that I kind of had to put my money where my mouth is to be able to galvanize that same sort of impetus from other people. And also be one of those people who starts those changes. So that's how I started getting into the investor space, because I would naturally connect with a lot of these businesses purely from a point of view because I was just so in love with what they were doing, because like I said, they're disrupting the status quo. And so for me, it was very much, oh my God, how can I be involved with you in some way? But then over time, it kind of, as I'd work with them more and more, I realized I was adding more value in terms of how they would grow. And so it naturally became a point of, like a crossroad of, maybe I should be investing in these businesses, because at the end of the day, I know best how to drive some of this investment to its best outcome. And so, that's how I got involved. And I started about 18 months ago. So not so long ago, because as you can imagine, to be an investor, you've also got to raise capital yourself.
Yes.
So, the first sort of few years when I started off my own consultancy was very much about building up that little pool of equity that I could then put into other companies, and some of which are also my own. But that's been my journey so far.
Awesome. So what was a lesson you learned kind of the hard way in building your company and becoming an investor?
Ooh. I think, it's actually something I learned even earlier on in my career, but it definitely translated into how I built, my portfolio of companies. But one of the things I learned very early on was that nobody is in charge of your success except you. Mm-hmm. Especially, it doesn't matter whether you're a founder, investor, career consultant, whatever it is. A lot of people tend to forget that it's really you who's in charge of how things work out for you. And it's very much about, one of my favorite quotes is, success is preparedness meeting luck, or luck is success meeting preparedness, or something like that.
I've heard that.
Yeah, and I think it's very true, because a lot of people ask me, like, how did you know that this was the right thing to invest in, or how did you know that this was the right client to work with? And I think that a lot of that came with that element of preparedness, like understanding where is this market going, or where is the industry going, or where is legislation going, or how is this going to shape in the future based on current circumstances, and almost looking out to the future 10 years in advance, 5 years in advance. Like, you'll love this, Kyle. One of my mentors looks into the future 200 years in advance. And I was like, what do you even know is going to happen in 200 years? But he's like a deep tech expert. So you can imagine, why she does that. But it's kind of people like that who really heavily influenced my thought and made me think that if you're going to stay ahead of the curve and be part of the narrative of disruption, then a lot of that requires you to really understand and chart where things are going to go. And so by knowing that, whenever opportunities would land on my table, whether they were potential clients or potential companies I could invest in, that preparedness always helped me know whether it was an opportunity to jump on or not. And so that whole notion of success is completely down to you, like, rings very true to me. I mean, even now I'll be sitting with my husband and, some of my mentors and looking at what are we doing in the next 5-10 years. And I can see sometimes it scares them, because they're like, oh my God, you're just thinking way too far ahead. Like, you don't even know if that's going to happen. And the thing is, I've been with my husband now for almost 10 years. So he'll like sheepishly say in the corner, yeah, you say that, but just watch what happens. So, and they've all seen it. So, and sometimes they think it's like this luck or gift. And I'm like, it's really not. It's a tool you have, and you sharpen it more and more, the more involved you are in the space. But that's really what it's been for me. I think the biggest lesson I've learned is you are completely in charge of your career and your success, and how you drive that to fruition.
Would you like to be a guest on the Career Challenges podcast? Go to careerchallengespodcast.com to find out how. While you're there, check out other episodes and download them through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, Castbox, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. The Career Challenges podcast is hosted by me, Kyle Weckerly. I'm a certified professional ghostwriter who works with business thought leaders and industry experts to write polished manuscripts, assess their publishing options, and create book marketing plans. I've worked with consultants, high-ticket salespeople, coaches, speakers, C-level executives, and business owners. My authors have worked for USAA, Vistage, Booz Allen Hamilton, Austin Technology Council, and the John Maxwell team. My authors want to write a book to serve as a platform for their marketing endeavors. They know that becoming an author will help them secure speaking gigs, market their expertise, promote a product or service, and more. Are you ready to turn your experience, knowledge, and stories into actionable advice and connect with your ideal client? Then visit WeckerlyWriter.com to schedule a consultation today and begin your publishing journey. That's WeckerlyWriter.com. WeckerlyWriter.com. And now, back to the Career Challenges podcast.
Wow. So when I was, researching into you and your company and what you do, I kept seeing CIC, and that kept popping up. And so I assume it's something with investing and getting stuff set up, and that, because I'm here in the States and you're there in the UK, that I know even less, because I know very little about investing here. So I know even less about investing there in the UK.
Yeah. So a CIC is almost like a company structure, like how we have a limited liability company or a partnership. A CIC is what in the UK we call a community interest company. And it's almost a hybrid of a charity or a 501c in the States. Is that right?
I think so. Or a 503B, I think is one of the ones they call it here. Or
Yeah.
the numbers.
Yeah, I'm very sketchy with also my knowledge of like legal company structure, but effectively it's a hybrid between a charity and a limited company. So the driver is that essentially as a CIC, you're expected to reinvest a large proportion of your profits back into your company, but that profit has to go into community initiatives and like societal change projects. So the idea is that you're given the structure of a limited company so that you can operate from a competitive point of view, so that you can drive to create profit. But then the flip side of it is that that profit has to be reinvested into community causes. So I'm glad that you're seeing CIC as often as you do when you research me, because it means that the SEO is doing its job. But my husband and I founded the CIC just at the end of last year because, well, at first we were going to set it up as a foundation because we're both obviously very passionate about solving a lot of societal change issues, because we see it from a point of view of the solutions do exist. So what is it going to take to mobilize the money behind those solutions to make them into actual reality? And so we thought about a foundation structure, but then when I saw this, I just absolutely loved it, because it kind of helps the world see me and my husband as founders who are completely accountable because we're legally forced to be. Mm-hmm. So this whole issue that we see a lot with, corporates and the sustainability agenda is not being delivered, and CSR being a version of greenwashing, et cetera, kind of gets completely knocked on the head when you're operating under a structure which just mandates you to do it that way. So for us, the CIC is called Leaving a Legacy. Mm-hmm. And we have obviously two sides of the business. So the one side of it is the one that actually does the profit making. And we've focused that very much on the startup and entrepreneurs community. So we have a revenue generating vehicle called the Legacy Business School. And under the school, we run accelerators and incubators around what we believe are the future markets and economies of the world, which are also sustainable and going to serve on reducing our carbon footprint and kind of shifting us into a stronger, sustainable society. But the profit we make from the school is directly reinvested into community projects under three pillars: trees, seas, and species. So under trees, obviously, we have a target to plant 1 billion trees in Britain by 2050.
Wow.
And as we grow, we hope to set up similar chapters across the world. Under seas, we're measuring how much waste we can pull out of the ocean through a kind of peer-to-peer network of divers. So in under species, we're still kind of working on the projects that we want to support and how would we actually see positive change come through. But yeah, we're very proud of what we've set up. I mean, it's still very early stages, but the biggest thing for both of us was just to show the world that entrepreneurship can be a massive force for good, that you can galvanize business around societal problems and actually create both profit and value, and that you can reinvest that profit into grassroots initiatives where we really need solutions immediately rather than in the long-term future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And so when some people use the word hybrid, like hybrid publishing here, they say you get all the benefits and none of the backdraws. I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true, because no matter what business you have, there's something that's either not going to work as well, or it's there's going to be a challenge somewhere with this model. So with the CIC model, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing?
Raising investment.
It always comes back to the money, right?
You're right, and I think that's also a societal construct that has to change. I mean, I'd love to get into that in a separate conversation, but I think investors are it depends on the generational type of investor you're looking at. If they're a baby boomer, their attitude to investment is completely different to a millennial or a Gen Z or Gen Alpha, because the Gretas of the world care about climate change and want to solve it. And so they would put money behind a social enterprise or etc. But then, maybe like, I don't know, the Jeff Bezoses of the world wouldn't, because for them, a CIC is not really going to make their portfolio a lot of money. And that's kind of the pitfalls we see, that, if we were going to raise investment, we're looking for a specific type of investor who is really okay with only taking 7% of the profit. And whilst that is a challenge, it's a unique challenge insofar as it's really forcing us to sieve out people within our network who truly, truly care about what we're doing and are behind us because of the value we deliver through the company to society, and not necessarily just to make a profit. So it's a real litmus test in itself to really find institutional and private investors who stand by those morals. So yeah, it's a very interesting challenge we have. I mean, my husband's very frustrated with it, but I kind of see the positive side in it, where I'm like, what's going to sieve out some very cool, interesting people? Just watch. Yeah. So yeah, that's the struggle we have at the moment.
Yeah, I find them, when I'm really frustrated, with a project or, with ghostwriting, just trying to get things moving, that, in a way it's good. I mean, I don't like it. I hate being frustrated. I hate when I don't have the answer right there for me to get to the next step. So, I feel for him. I really feel for him, the frustration angle of it. But in a way, it's good. It forces us to look at things in a different light and to take a different approach.
Yeah, and I think it's also forcing us as founders to really look at a different perspective. I think in the startup space, there is this general aptitude to just force yourself to find the first investor, rather than also force yourself to get your product to market in whatever way you can to actually start generating revenue. And that's one of the things that we proved in the early stages last year when we started the company, was that we can generate income and money without the investment. So we can prove our model works. It may not work at scale right now, because that's what we would need the investment for, but at least we're getting our product to market and generating some income. So to give you an example, we ran a weekend accelerator for startups that are delivering sustainability through technology last year in November. And through the profits we generated from that, we are going to be planting about 1,000 trees in the UK, which is pretty significant considering that there were only 5 startups who attended. And on top of that, we promise. That's what I mean about, we need to find an investor who understands the breadth of what impact we're achieving, because it's not just the tree planting. It's also that through that accelerator now, all those startups have, I think 2 of the 4 have gone away and secured their next round of investment, because the whole point of the accelerator is to show them how to build a better narrative for an investor and the type of investor that they would want. So now we have great ideas that are getting invested in by the right people. We're planting trees. Like, this is the kind of radial effect we want to prove to the world that you can have when you set up a community interest company.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So you mentioned a narrative, of course, and I love stories and everything story based. And I've been listening a lot to Donald Miller, Building a Story Brand podcast, and he keeps coming back to, you need to have story, you need to have story. So are you finding that is kind of I don't want to say like a silver bullet or a hidden weapon, but is using a narrative very helpful or beneficial in getting that yes from an investor?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love that you said that. You need to tell me the title of this podcast. I'm going to have to go and listen to it.
Build a Story Brand podcast with Don Miller.
Okay, I'm going to go listen to it.
Definitely.
But, I mean,
I should get money for that.
You should. And you should tell him that as well. But no, I mean, I have always been a huge proponent of storytelling, especially from my consulting days, because one of the biggest challenges we would have is sometimes, having a very broad audience in the room and trying to get all of them on one page. And if we felt like we would just focus it all on facts and strategic statements, it would never work. But if we told a story, it was just far more powerful. So I really believe in the power of storytelling, also because I feel it's a very strong way for people to retain facts in their mind, even though they don't realize they're doing it. Like, everybody remembers what happened in The Lion King, because there's animation and there's emotion and there's all these things that are attached to the story that help you remember what happened. And I think it's exactly the same when you're pitching to an investor or even just telling the world about your product. So for us, the narratives that we've developed around our pillars, especially around trees and species, have been immensely successful at helping us secure partners. So, that's the other side of the spectrum. We just think it's an investor we want, but we've been approached by so many different collaborators who are just happy to sort of sponsor the events we do because they just love the idea that we're going to be planting trees as a result of it. So you never really know where your next business comes from, but I'm a huge proponent in storytelling, and it absolutely is a silver bullet. I mean, I even remember when I was at college, you guys call it college? We call it university. The easiest way for me to prep for, big exams where you'd have to write, long essays would be to build stories around the topics I wanted to talk about. And that just helped me retain information so much better. And it's just such an effective tool. It is really a silver bullet when it comes to, anyone who's in business, really, because at the end of the day, people buy great stories.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So, I mean, you keep saying it's a silver bullet, but I mean, like, I keep thinking it's not just that there's a story. It has to be a story told well.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
Because I've seen some commercials of some advertisements who try to, or even, former bosses who try to, motivate, and they use a story. And it's like, well, just because you told me a story doesn't mean I'm now motivated. Your story was pretty terrible. So I would argue it's got to be a good story and told well. So. Absolutely.
No, 100%. I mean, it kind of goes back to that question you asked about the best pitch I'd heard, right? Mm-hmm. It was a great story. It had all of the right statements. It had all of the things that I personally cared about, like, references to people, planet, profit, sustainability. I mean, one of the best statements they said is that we're a 21st century company ensuring that we have a 22nd. And at that point, I was like, right, sold. Like, it wasn't I didn't even need to hear any more. Just that statement in itself was so powerful enough for me to pay even more attention. So you are absolutely right. It is definitely how well the story is told. It's not just telling the story.
Yeah, true. And that's just part of me as a ghostwriter. It's like, it's got to be a good story. It's got to be a good story. So we're coming to the close here, and I always want to ask my guests, what is next for you? What is next for you, Nimisha, and your companies?
So I think for this decade, our biggest focus is going to be on our CIC and really growing its footprint so that we can support the missions that we have under each of our pillars. And we're very excited about that because like I said to you, the radial effect of what we're doing is just something that I can't wait to measure, so for us, this is the next big thing, because in terms of what we do in the consulting space, we're very involved with that. But you'll know this. I mean, Kyle, you've worked with so many thought leaders that when you've nailed something and you do it well, you can kind of step away from it a little bit and turn your focus onto other things. And so for me, this decade is very much about building this CIC and effectively really galvanizing a lot of the new businesses that we're going to need for this next decade of change.
Awesome. And so if there's a company out there who thinks, well, maybe Nimisha could be my next investor, how can they reach out and connect with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Nimisha Brahmbhatt. There's only one out there. So
oh, that's lucky for you.
I know. So, but yeah, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. My contact details are on there. So if you prefer to send an email, you can do so. But, I think if there are companies out there who are interested in working with us and who are also kind of moved by our mission that we work with startups and use the profits we make to support change in nature, then, we're more than happy to facilitate. We're also looking at how we can take this model into corporates. So those companies who want to do in-house innovation or disruption, or actually look at how they can deliver through sustainability, we're kind of replicating this model into that space to work with multidisciplinary teams in there. So, we're open to working with anybody who's interested in this space.
Wow. Sounds like there's a lot happening and a lot that can happen.
Yes, that's the most exciting thing about all of this.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm getting excited about it just now, just thinking about it. There we go.
You can be involved too, Kyle, if you want.
Yes, we can talk about that. Sure. So, all right. Well, Nimisha Brahmbhatt, thank you so much for being on the Career Challenges podcast with me today.
It's such a pleasure, Kyle. And honestly, thank you so much for having me today. It's been really great to chat about all these interesting things around disruption.
Thank you for listening to the Career Challenges podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and like the Career Challenges podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Visit careerchallengespodcast.com for more information. Schedule your free consultation with Kyle Weckerly by visiting weckerlywriter.com today. That's WECKERLYWRITER.com. Thank you.